Hi, everybody, and welcome to Chapter 9, which is going to cover the Department of Homeland Security and Homeland Security in general. So, prior to the 9/11 2001 attacks, Homeland Security was the responsibility of independent agencies. So, we had the FBI, we had the CIA, and they were each standalone agencies in addition to a multitude of other federal agencies that each had their own mission about what part of Homeland Security was their responsibility. Um, After 9/11, we also saw the very fast introduction of something called the Patriot Act of 2001. This was originally created with the intention to intercept terrorism by changing the way in which investigations are conducted. Specifically, the Patriot Act broadened search and seizure abilities by government entities. It enhanced prosecutorial powers against terrorists and suspected terrorists. It increased border security, and there was an intention for the improvement of intelligence and information sharing from agency to agency regarding threats to the homeland. And that is a specific response to one of the major criticisms is that we did have intel prior to 9/11 that the attacks were coming, and that information didn't go from the proper organization to other proper organizations in order to mount a response or even to get it on our radar. Along with the Patriot Act post 9/11, we saw an increase in FISA. FISA was developed in 1978, and FISA stands for the Foreign Intelligence and Surveillance Act. But it was actually ramped up after 9/11. And this expanded electronic and surveillance capabilities of the United States and the collection of foreign intelligence information between foreign powers. And in short, what that means in a nutshell is it took away some of the restrictions on the surveillance that the government can do in order to gather more wide intel, more detailed, more wide intelligence on terrorist activities in an attempt to prevent them. A close partner to the FISA is the FISC, the FISC, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. This is responsible for judicial oversight of the intelligence community's activities. In 2003, President George W. Bush created the Department of Homeland Security. And this sort of was a department that was born out of all of those previous things that I talked about, the 9/11 attacks, the FISA courts, etc., the Patriot Act, and so forth. And what the Department of Homeland Security did was it became what I call an umbrella agency, where it became the overarching federal agency, and it sort of subsumed a bunch of other federal agencies like the FBI, like Borders and Customs, like Aviation Security. All of those used to be standalone federal agencies, and now they are all a part of the Department of Homeland Security. Okay. The idea here was to incorporate them into one large federal agency to increase the ability to protect the homeland from threats, both foreign and domestic. In addition, something that sort of sparked the development of the Department of Homeland Security was the 9/11 Commission, and the 9/11 Commission was a commission that came together post 9/11. Did a full investigation of everything that happened, where all intelligence failures and security failures happened, and how we can shore up those shortcomings in order to prevent future terrorism and future attacks. And one of the findings that they issued, or they came away with a multitude of findings, 6 major points, and those include the following. So first is that the United States needed a single high-level intelligence director to direct, supervise, and oversee the intelligence community. Remember that the intelligence community consists of 18 federal agencies, and that's a tremendous amount of workers, that's a big number of agencies, and they have mass amounts of intelligence coming through, and none of them were sort of communicating properly with each other, which means there were holes in our ability to protect the homeland. The 9/11 Commission said, hey, we need one person who is going to make sure that all of those 18 intelligence level community participants are passing on information that they gather to the powers that be so that we can mount a proper response of protection. Homeland security measures needed to be improved, including terrorist watch lists, biometric identification to screen travelers, seaports, borders, and airports. In short, making sure that people who should not be getting into the country, who mean the country harm, making sure that they're not getting in through any method of entry. It also suggested for improvement in intelligence gathering and counterterrorism activities of the U.S. Congress. And the Department of Homeland Security overall focuses to address both present and future events in the following areas. So, for one, increased preparedness for catastrophic events, and that can be any catastrophic event. It doesn't just have to be a terrorist attack. This could also be, a natural disaster. This could be an attack on our power grid, any sort of catastrophe. Creating better transportation security systems to move people and cargo more efficiently. This is of huge importance because there's a tremendous amount of cargo that is moved across the United States every day in our supply chain. There's also an overwhelming amount of freight and cargo that comes in and out of our ports every single day, which leaves us very vulnerable to terrorism and terrorist attacks. So the Department of Homeland Security made this a priority, enhancing the security measures around our supply chain and around transportation. Strengthening border security and the immigration process. And once again, this is an attempt to keep people out of the country who, are trying to come in, illegally through our borders or legally through our immigration process, but they're actually terrorists or somebody looking to cause harm. Enhance information sharing with partners. We talked about that a little bit with the intelligence communities. Improve DHS procurement and information technology. Obviously, having up-to-date technology on information gathering is really important for our intelligence purposes. And safeguarding and securing cyberspace through cybersecurity. So increasing America's cybersecurity. Since the 9/11 Commission and since the introduction of DHS, technology has exploded. I mean, it was exploding back then. It's exploding even more now. And it's evolving and developing faster than ever. And so we have to be on top of it in order to have the best possible protection for everything that is now electronic. Everything, our power grid, everything is our water supply. It's all done by electronic issues, and we need cybersecurity to protect all of the integrity and the safety of all of those that infrastructure. And finally, they wanted to realign the Department of Homeland Security to maximize the ability of this agency to protect the homeland from attacks, which is the most important part of DHS, is protecting the homeland from attacks. One of the other things that they did is they introduced aviation security. There was always a level of aviation security, but it got ramped way up after 9/11. And the Transportation Security Administration was developed and put under DHS after 9/11 to prevent future terrorist attacks, so that nobody else can fly planes into massive buildings. And they do that through passenger baggage and cargo screening. They always screened cargo and baggage to some extent, but they weren't screening passengers, and the amount of screening has increased in a tremendous number. Similar actions were also taken to shore up transportation industries, including trucking, maritime security, and railroad security. All of those outlets move a ton of cargo and are equally vulnerable to hauling illicit bombs, people getting in through to the country through those outlets. Finally, I want to focus on the National Incident and Management System, that is abbreviated as NIMS. FEMA is the lead agency under DHS to administer national incident management. FEMA stands for the Federal Emergency Management Association. It is our federal agency that responds when there is a catastrophic event, when there's an emergency. Now, it's the way it happens is they don't hop in first. Every state has their own emergency management agency. Here in Pennsylvania, ours is called PEMA, so Pennsylvania's Emergency Management Association. And all emergencies, they like to say, start and end at the local level. So if there's an emergency, whether it's a terrorist attack, let's say it's a chemical spill, what have you, whatever the catastrophe is, whatever a natural disaster, whatever it is, the emergency response needs to start at the local and state level. But when the local and state agencies that are supposed to respond to those emergencies are overwhelmed because the emergency is of such gravity and magnitude, that's when FEMA steps in and provides support. When local responders just simply don't have enough manpower, they don't have enough supplies, then FEMA steps in. NIMS has 5 main components. Those are preparedness, communication and information management, resource management, command and management, and ongoing management and maintenance. NIMS also integrates with the private sector as well as because those local emergencies often have needs that go beyond, public agencies. So, for example, anytime there's a catastrophe or an emergency, there's usually huge demand on local hospitals. Local hospitals are private sector organizations, and that's when NIMS, which is a public agency, is going to partner with those private sector agencies to make sure all needs get met. So finally, just to wrap up and provide a summary, Homeland Security was originally DHS was born over concern for terrorism and preventing future terrorist attacks. It is still a primary area of focus for Homeland Security, but it's also grown to be an incredibly broad organization, and it encompasses any kind of threat protection and response to any kind of threat, disaster, catastrophe or emergency, anything from natural disasters to pandemics or epidemics, anything that impacts the welfare and the function of day-to-day life in the United States.